It was supposed to be the most prepared expedition in history. 2 powerful ships, the best technology of the 19th century, enough food to survive for years. And yet, 129 men sailed into the Arctic. Not a single one returned. For more than a century, the ice kept their fate hidden. And when search teams finally began to uncover clues, what they found only deepened the mystery. Skeletons scattered across the frozen ground, boats abandoned far from the sea, and disturbing signs that, near the end, something desperate happened. But to understand how everything collapsed, we have to go back to the beginning. The year is 1845. At that time, the world was obsessed with a single geographic prize, the legendary Northwest Passage, a sea route through the Arctic that could connect Europe and Asia. Whoever controlled it would control global trade. So the powerful Royal Navy launched one of the most ambitious expeditions ever attempted. Leading it was a respected officer and Arctic veteran, John Franklin. He had already faced starvation, frozen oceans and near death in earlier expeditions. Many believed he was too old to return to the Arctic. He was 59. But this mission was different. This was history. Franklin was given 2 ships that represented the absolute peak of naval engineering, the HMS Erebus and the HMS Terror. These ships were not ordinary exploration vessels. Their hulls were reinforced to crush through ice. They had steam engines, heated cabins, a massive library, scientific equipment, and thousands of preserved food cans. Everything about the mission suggested success. When the ships departed England, crowds gathered along the docks. Families waved, bands played, officers saluted. For the crew, it felt like the beginning of something legendary. No one realised they were watching the last moment those men would ever be seen alive. Months later, whaling ships spotted the expedition near Baffin Bay. The ships were moving steadily between icebergs. Nothing seemed wrong. The crews even waved back. That was the last confirmed sighting. After that, the expedition vanished. No letters ever reached England, no survivors returned, no wreckage drifted back south. At first, no one panicked. Arctic expeditions often disappeared for long periods, but as years passed, concern turned into fear. Where were the ships? Where was Franklin? Eventually, search missions began, then more, then even more. Over time, dozens of expeditions combed the Arctic looking for answers, and slowly, pieces of the story began to surface. At first, it was small things: a campsite, a tin can, footprints frozen into ancient snow. Then the discoveries became stranger: discarded clothing, abandoned equipment, signs that men had been travelling on foot. But the most disturbing discovery stopped explorers in their tracks: a boat mounted on a sled, hundreds of kilometres from open water. Inside were 2 human skeletons, and around them were objects that made no sense: loaded guns, silverware, chocolate, books. It looked less like a survival escape and more like a group of people making irrational decisions. Something was very wrong with the expedition. Years later, a breakthrough finally appeared on a remote place called King William Island. Searchers discovered a written message left behind by the crew, a small document tucked into a can of stones. It was the only official record of what had happened, and its contents were chilling. The ships had been trapped in ice for years, completely unable to move, and then came the line that changed everything. John Franklin was dead. The leader of the expedition had died in the Arctic wilderness. Now imagine the situation. More than 100 men stranded in endless ice. No clear leadership, no rescue in sight. Eventually they made a desperate decision. They abandoned the ships. 105 survivors began marching south across the Arctic into one of the harshest environments on Earth. Temperatures dropping below -40 degrees, winds slicing through layers of clothing, ice stretching endlessly in every direction. And slowly, things began to fall apart. First came disease, scurvy. Without vitamin C, the human body literally starts to break down. Comes bleed, bones weaken, strength disappears. Then came hunger. Even with all the supplies they had brought, something had gone terribly wrong. Modern research suggests many of the food cans were contaminated with lead. Lead poisoning can cause confusion, paranoia, poor judgment.
Suddenly, the strange discoveries began to make sense. Why drag silverware across the Arctic? Why carry heavy books while starving? They might not have been thinking clearly anymore. Then came the most disturbing accounts of all. Years later, Inuit hunters in the region told stories passed down through generations. They described small groups of starving Europeans wandering across the ice, thin, exhausted, barely alive. Some collapsed and never stood again. Others continued walking until they simply disappeared into the frozen horizon. And there was something darker. Human remains were discovered with clear cut marks on the bones, evidence that near the end, some members of the expedition resorted to cannibalism. It was the final stage of desperation. But even that could not save them. One by one, every man vanished into the Arctic. The ice slowly erased the evidence. The ships disappeared. The bodies disappeared. The story faded into legend. For more than 150 years, historians and explorers wondered what truly happened out there. Where were the ships? What were the crew's final moments like? Then in 2014, something incredible appeared beneath the freezing Arctic water. A wreck, perfectly preserved in the cold darkness. It was the HMS Erebus, after more than a century lost beneath the ice. 2 years later, another discovery shocked historians again. The second ship had been found, the HMS Terror, and what explorers saw was almost eerie. Cabin still intact, objects still in place, doors closed. It looked as if the crew had just left, like a frozen moment in time. Even now, the Arctic is still revealing pieces of the puzzle, but the final days of those 129 men remain one of the most haunting mysteries in exploration history. Imagine the silence of that frozen world, the endless darkness of the Arctic winter, and a group of explorers slowly realizing no one was coming to save them.